Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. And now we'll get right back to business this morning. Our reading a discussion of this wonderful book entitled The History of Romanism by John Dowling. Yesterday we concluded about midway down subsection 52 on page 170, if you're following along. Subsection 52, page 170. And by way of recount, we see that the king of the Lombards, Astolphus, who had conquered much of the Pope's supposed dominions, was defeated by the French king, Pepin, and forced to sue for peace. And part of the terms of the armistice was that he was to return the land that he had conquered, not to the emperor in the east in Constantinople, but to the Pope himself. And after he had signed the armistice, went back home, got to contemplating what he had done, and found out that he finally realized that the Pope was attempting to make himself a king, to make himself the emperor of the West. And seeing the Pope's duplicity and seeing the Pope's hypocrisy and his treason, the king of the Lombards, Astolphus, decides not to perform his end of the bargain. And now he is once again a threat to the Pope and to Rome and to Ravenna and to all of Italy. And so the Pope first appeals to the emperor, who says, "Stuff it under your crown." And then he is resorted to go back to Pepin and begging his assistance to preserve the papal power. Now, the Pope immediately wrote an urgent letter and sent it by an abbot by the name of Fulrad to his former protector, Pepin, in which he says, quote, listen, these are the words of the Pope, "To defend the Church, that is, to defend the Roman Catholic Church, is, of all works, the most meritorious." Okay? That's the most holy work you can do in the Roman Catholic Church, is to defend the Roman Catholic Church. He continues, he says, "and that to which is reserved the greatest reward in the world to come." That is, the greatest reward that one can earn in heaven is to defend the Roman Catholic Church. Okay? He continues, he says, "God might himself have defended his church or raised up others to ascertain and defend the just rights of his apostle, St. Peter, to defend the Pope. Okay? But it pleased him, it pleased God to choose you, Pepin, my most excellent son, out of the whole human race for that holy purpose." So God himself could have, according to the Pope, defended his church single-handedly, all by himself, but instead he chose Pepin out of the whole human race to perform this most holy purpose, to defend the Roman Catholic Church. Okay? Now he continues, he says, "For it was in compliance with his divine inspiration and command that I applied to you, that I came to your kingdom, that I exhorted you to espouse the cause of his beloved apostle and your great protector, St. Peter." So the Pope is claiming to Pepin to have heard directly from God to appeal to Pepin to preserve the Roman Catholic Church and to preserve his vicar on earth, St. Peter the apostle, that is, the popes of Rome. He says, "You espoused his cause accordingly, and your zeal for his honor was quickly rewarded with a signal and miraculous victory." So Pepin has already once defeated the king of the Lombards and gained the victory for the Pope and a promise by the king of the Lombards to restore all the lands that he had conquered and give them not to the emperor to which they rightly belonged, but to the Pope himself. He says, "You espoused his cause accordingly." You espoused the cause of God accordingly, and your zeal for his honor was quickly rewarded with a signal and miraculous victory over the Lombards, of course. He continues, he says, but my most excellent son, St. Peter, has not yet reaped the least advantage from so glorious a victory, though owing entirely to him. The perfidious and wicked Astolphus has not yet yielded to him 1 foot of ground. Nay, unmindful of his oath, and actuated by the devil, he has begun hostilities anew, and bidding defiance both to you and to St. Peter, threatens us and the whole Roman people with death and destruction, as the abbot Fulrad and his companions will inform you." Unquote. So, Pepin is now informed by the great apostle St. Peter in Rome that Pepin reneged on the deal. And Pepin is the only one left in the world, since the emperor has pretty much said to St. Peter in Rome, stuff it in your mitre. Pepin is his last resort. And so the Pope in Rome uses the power of heaven to convict Pepin to come to his rescue, as though he had the power to do this. Okay? Now, I want my listeners to understand that this history is being revealed to us so that we will know for a certainty who the Antichrist is. All of these events that we're currently reading here in this book are the proof that Paul's prophecy was correct about this great wickedness that would rise up in the absence of the Caesars, and would be more wicked, more brutal against the saints than even the ancient pagan Roman Caesars. That he would use all power and signs and lying wonders to claw and dig and scratch and elevate himself to the status of King of Kings and Lord of Lords in the world. He would use every trick in the book. Now, this is deception in its greatest form. To claim to be the voice of God on the earth, and then to pit king against king, nation against nation, people against people, to conquer more power, more land, more kingly and priestly status in the world. None of it is given to the Pope by God himself. There's not one instance where any of this increasing power has been given to the Pope by God himself. This is through nothing but intrigue and lies and threats and flatteries, all which have been used throughout the biblical past by evil, wicked men. And this happens to be the epitome of evil and wicked men, and he uses all these strategies, all in one person, the Pope of Rome. And this is God's mercy to us, so that we would witness this man of sin, see his history for ourselves, and come to the obvious conclusion that just as Christ is the Savior, the Son of the living God, and Redeemer of the world, the papacy is the Antichrist. And this is proof. All right, he continues, he says, the rest of the Pope's letter consists chiefly of repeated invectives against Astolphus as a sworn enemy of St. Peter, and repeated commendations, or rather flatteries, of Pepin, his two sons, and the whole French nation as the chief friends and favorites of that apostle, St. Peter, the Pope, in other words. In the end, he puts Pepin, and likewise his two sons, in mind of a promise they had made to be to the doorkeeper of heaven. Tells them that the Prince of the Apostles himself kept the instrument of their donation, that it had been delivered into the apostles' own hands, and that he held it tight to produce it at the last day for their punishment if it was not executed, and for their reward if it was. And therefore conjures them by the living God, by the Virgin Mary and by all the angels of heaven, by St. Peter himself and St. Paul, and the tremendous day of judgment, to cause St. Peter to be in possession of all the places named in the donation, and that without further delay, lest by excusing others they should themselves become inexcusable and be in the end eternally damned. Okay? Now all of this is still on record. All of this writing of the Pope is still on record. It can be read and researched, and the document holding this information is called the Codex Carolinus, and it's in let's see, if I read here, the original was the authentic manuscript. It's now kept in the Imperial Library of Vienna. So this is truthful history. This is a revelation. This is the fulfillment of Bible prophecy. And now the Pope is putting the ultimatum to Pepin. If you don't force Astolphus to hand over the land that he conquered and hand it over to me, the Pope, you'll be damned for eternity. But if you make Astolphus give up the land, not to the emperor, but to me, thereby making me the king of the West, then you'll receive the greatest reward possible in heaven. Pretty pretentious, isn't it? By anybody's standards. Has anyone ever in the history of the world exceeded this standard? Has anyone in the world in history even rivaled this standard of hypocrisy and of wickedness? Has anyone in the world ever claimed to be the successor of St. Peter, the vicar of Christ on the earth? Has anyone else in the world ever commanded kings on this level? The choice is obvious. It's the papacy. Subsection 53. As some time elapsed and the Pope had received no intelligence of the march of Pepin, in other words, no word had been received in Rome at the Vatican that King Pepin had jumped up off of his throne, assembled his armies, and went scatting across the Alps to conquer once again the Lombards. So the Pope's getting really nervous. King Pepin, who's been threatened with the eternal glory in heaven for the most meritorious work of defending the church, or threatened with eternal damnation if he doesn't just jump right off his throne and go marching off after Astolphus to force him to give all that land to the Pope, Pope Stephen's getting real nervous. It says Stephen began to fear that the imposition produced by his letter on the mind of the king had not been sufficiently powerful to induce him to cross the Alps a second time, and as the city, unless relieved, could not sustain the siege much longer, that is, Rome, unless it was relieved by Pepin and his army, could not sustain the siege much longer, he adopted the extraordinary expedient of pretending by one of those pious frauds which papists have always regarded as lawful and commendable, to have, listen to this, to have received a letter from St. Peter in heaven, beseeching the immediate interposition of the French on behalf of his successor and his see. So the Pope is going to conjure up a letter. And I'm told that it was written in golden thread on parchment, as having originated from the very Apostle Peter in heaven, and sent to Pope Stephen to deliver to Pepin. Okay? Now this is a most pious fraud. St. Peter in heaven did not write a letter. The Pope did. And he attributes it to a dead saint. St. Peter. And with this letter directly from heaven, directly from the handwriting of the Apostle St. Peter, Pepin is going to be goaded into defending the Pope against Astolphus of the Lombards. Okay, this most singular document, as well as the last quoted letter of Pope Stephen, has been preserved in the Codex Carolinus. The superscription is as follows: Simon Peter, a servant and apostle of Jesus Christ, to the three most excellent kings, Pepin, Charles, and Carloman, to all the holy bishops, abbots, presbyters, and monks, to all the dukes, counts, commanders of the French army, and to the whole people of France, grace unto you and peace be multiplied. Unquote. Now remember, this is a letter supposedly written by the very hand of the Apostle Peter. It came down from God out of heaven, according to the popes. It was delivered to the popes, and then the Pope delivers it to the king, King Pepin. He says, the letter then proceeds thus, quote, I am the Apostle Peter, to whom it was said, Thou art Peter, and upon this rock, etc. Feed my sheep, etc. And to thee will I give the keys, etc. As this was all said to me in particular, all who hearken to me and obey my exhortations may persuade themselves and firmly believe that their sins are forgiven them, and that they will be admitted, cleansed from all guilt into everlasting life. Hearken therefore to me, Peter the Apostle and servant of Jesus Christ. And since I have preferred you to all the nations of the earth, hasten, I beseech and conjure you, if you care to be cleansed of your sins, and to earn, let me repeat, to earn an eternal reward, hasten to the relief of my city, that is Rome, obviously, my church, the Roman Catholic Church, obviously, of the people committed to my care, that is all of Christianity, ready to fall into the hands of the wicked Lombards, their merciless enemies. It has pleased the Almighty that my body should rest in this city, that is Rome, right underneath Vatican, the St. Peter's Cathedral in the Vatican, the body that has suffered for the sake of Christ such exquisite torments. It is taught in the Roman Catholic Church that the Apostle Peter went to Rome, was tortured in various means, and finally crucified upside down on a cross, which is all of it a lie, completely made up by the Roman Catholic Church. The Apostle Peter's bones have even been found in the cemetery in Jerusalem, they say, and Rome's pretensions are absolutely lies. Okay? He says, it has pleased the Almighty that my body should rest in this city, the body that has suffered for the sake of Christ such exquisite torments. And can you, my most Christian son, stand by unconcerned and see it insulted by the most wicked of nations? No, let it never be said, and it will, I hope, never be said that I, the apostle of Jesus Christ, that my apostolic church, the foundation of the faith, that my flock, recommended to you by me and my vicar, have trusted in you, but trusted in vain. Our Lady, the Virgin Mary, Mother of God, joins in earnestly entreating you, nay, commands you to hasten, to run, to fly to the relief of my favorite people, reduced almost to the last gasp, and calling in that extremity night and day upon her and upon me. The thrones and dominions, the principalities and the powers, and the whole multitude of heavenly hosts entreat you, together with us, not to delay, but to come with all possible speed and rescue my chosen flock from the jaws of the ravening wolves ready to devour them. My vicar might in his extremity have recurred, and not in vain, to other nations. But with me the French are and ever have been the first, the best, and the most deserving of all nations, and I would not suffer the reward, the exceeding great reward that is reserved, and in this and in the world to come, for those who shall deliver my people to be earned by any other." Unquote. So Peter has spoken directly from heaven, commanding Pepin with the most glorious promises and the most dreadful threats if he doesn't just now get off of his throne and come immediately to the rescue of the Pope and to the rescue of the Church, so that he might defeat the barbarian Lombards and recapture all the lands that the Lombards conquered, and then give them as a gift to the Pope. For the first time in the history of the world, the Pope can become a king among kings. Now imagine, if you will, Bible-believing, God-fearing Christians reading the accounts of all these events in the newspapers. What do you think they're thinking? Exactly what they should think. Paul was right. This is the man of sin. This is an institution of Satan. This is not an institution of God. These kinds of intrigues would never have been instructed by God. And they came to the right conclusion because God made it certain that they not be deceived. And so all of these intrigues, all of this corruption, all of this plotting, all of this treason, all this murder and war goes squarely upon Satan and his vicar in Rome, the papacy. You remember when we read Martin Luther's work? Martin Luther said it right. He said the papacy is nothing but a mask for Satan himself. That the papacy is a mask behind which Satan resides. And God's people during this period of time were absolutely certain, centuries before Martin Luther, that he was right. That this papacy is indeed the man of sin, the son of perdition, the Antichrist, the counterfeit Christ. He's not the vicar of Christ, he's the vicar of Satan himself. He's made it absolutely, positively, undeniably certain in the minds of God's people who is the Antichrist. And they're just as certain in their hearts that the papacy is the Antichrist as they are certain in their hearts that Jesus is the Christ. This is God's mercy. This history is serving us today the same as it served God's people in their day, to give us the facts, to give us the truth. Who is the Antichrist? Now, the next question you must ask yourself before we continue: why isn't your pastor telling you about this? Why isn't your Protestant and evangelical pastors and priesters telling you about any of this history? Why are you not telling your pastors and priesters the truth and demanding that they do the same? We are all under command of the Lord to tell the truth. Turns out that the great Peter the Apostle, in his letter directly from heaven to the Pope, is not over yet. Peter's a little bit long-winded in this letter. Okay? The author says, in the rest of the letter, St. Peter is made to repeat all the Pope had said in his letters. In other words, the Apostle Peter in heaven has read all the letters that the popes have written to Pepin and to everyone concerned, and he knows the whole deal. So Peter reinforces all the words, all the letters that the popes have written in the course of this history, therefore confirming that the Pope is the vicar of St. Peter, or the replacement of St. Peter, or the head of the church. Remarkable, isn't it? It says, in the rest of the letters, St. Peter is made to repeat all the Pope had said in his letters, to court the favor and protection of the French with the most abject flattery, one of Satan's greatest weapons, flattery. That's why I never respond to flatterers. Don't flatter me if you want a response. I'm not interested in flatteries. And he says, to inveigh with as much unchristian resentment and rancor as the Pope had inveighed against, quote, the most wicked nation of the Lombards, unquote, and to entreat his most Christian sons over and over again to come, and with all possible speed, to the relief of his vicar and his people, lest they should in the meantime fall into the hands of their implacable enemies, and those from whom they expected relief incur the displeasure of the Almighty and his, and be thereby excluded, notwithstanding all their other good works, from the kingdom of heaven. So St. Peter, the apostle, from heaven, has delivered a letter through the Pope to Pepin, that if you don't come to the aid of the Pope, who is desperate, if you don't conquer the Lombards, no matter what other good works that you've done in the world, they will count for nothing if you fail to deliver the Pope from his most implacable enemies, the Lombards. The Apostle Peter is desperate, isn't he? That if Pepin doesn't just jump right off his throne right now, the whole kingdom of heaven is lost. Now, do you think Pepin, who at first tried to ignore the Pope's letters, do you think Pepin, this most ignorant and superstitious king, will now rise up off of his throne and do what the great apostle St. Peter has ordered him to do? Subsection 54, page 172, with this letter from St. Peter in heaven, Pope Stephen, the infallible postmaster, dispatched a messenger in all haste to Pepin, but he had, upon the receipt of his first letter, assembled all his forces anew, and was, when he received this, within a day's march of the Alps. Okay? Pepin's going to war to help make the Pope a king in the earth, to help in the Pope's treason against the emperor in Constantinople, to help bring the Antichrist to kingly status. This is what happens when you fall prey to the man of sin in Rome and become one of his vassals. You end up finding yourself an abject adversary of Christ and a helper of Antichrist. Okay, he, that is Pepin, pursued his march without delay, and having forced the passes of those mountains, advanced never once halting until he reached Pavia, and laid a second time a siege, a close siege to that city. This is, remember, Pavia is the capital of the Lombards. This is Astolphus's house, okay, in Pavia. He pursued his march without delay, and having forced the passes of those mountains, we're talking about the Alps, most treacherous to cross those Alps, advanced, never once halting until he reached Pavia, and laid a second time a close siege to that city, not doubting but he should thus oblige or force Astolphus to retire from his siege in Rome. So Rome was surrounded by Astolphus and all of his armies. He'd given the ultimatum to the Roman people, you hand me the Pope and I will spare your life. But if you protect the Pope, I'll knock down the walls of the city and I'll kill every man, woman, and child alive, and no one will tell the tale. That's just how desperate a situation it was in Rome. So Pepin jumps off his throne with all of his armies and runs right to the hometown of Astolphus and besieges the city. Now, Astolphus is forced to capitulate, isn't he? He says Pepin was not mistaken in his calculations. Fearing that the French would make themselves masters of his metropolis and his kingdom, the Lombard king was compelled, before it was too late, once more to sue for peace, which was granted by the French king upon the humiliating conditions that Astolphus should execute literally the treaty of the former year and convey at once the exarchate of Ravenna to the Pope, that he should deliver up also the cities of Comacchio, defray all the expenses of war, and pay besides an annual tribute to France of 20,000 solidi of gold. Okay? So Astolphus is to give everything to the Pope. He should pay the cost of the war and then pay tribute to France, which makes Pepin king of the Lombards, doesn't it? Okay, if you're a debtor, you are a slave of the creditor, aren't you? So Astolphus has the ultimatum. And he says, these terms being agreed upon and sworn to by Astolphus, Pepin caused a new instrument to be drawn up, whereby he yielded all the places mentioned in the treaty to be forever held and possessed by St. Peter and his lawful successors in the See of Rome. Okay? The terms of the armistice was that Astolphus must give over lock, stock, and barrel everything that he had conquered, and give it not to the emperor to whom it belonged, but to the Pope himself and all of his successors, thus making the papacy a king among kings. Not yet king of kings, but a king among kings. And this is high treason. If the emperor of Constantinople were yet able, he would have immediately launched a flotilla and an army to conquer both the Lombards and the French and the papacy and restore the whole thing to Constantinople, right? But the emperor in Constantinople was unable. So the Pope, usurping the emperor, forces through Pepin an armistice whereby Astolphus, king of the Lombards, gives everything to the Pope, thus making the Pope of Rome the emperor of the West. Astolphus is literally having to give up his coveted position as emperor of the West to the Pope of Rome, thereby making him a king among kings in the world. He says, this instrument, signed by himself, by his two sons, and by the chief barons of the kingdom, he delivered to the abbot Fulrad, appointed him his commissary to receive in the Pope's name all the places mentioned in it. With this character, the abbot, attended by the commissaries of Astolphus, repaired immediately to Ravenna, and from thence to every city named in the instrument of donation, and having taken possession of them all in St. Peter's name and the Pope's, and everywhere received a significant number of hostages, he went with all his hostages immediately to Rome, and there laying the instrument of donation and the keys of each city on the tomb of St. Peter, put the Pope thereby at last in possession of the so long wished for principality, and thus was the Pope of Rome finally raised to the station of an earthly sovereign and took rank among the kings of the earth. Prophecy fulfilled, isn't it? And this was not done in secret. This was all done under the noonday sun, and God's people all over the world were privy to it. If not immediately, eventually they all heard of all of this, and thus confirmed in their hearts what Paul had told them, what Daniel had told them through the Scriptures, what the Apostle John had told them. This is the man of sin. This is the son of perdition. This is the one who will eventually call himself King of Kings and Lord of Lords. What mercy has God revealed to his people through history. Quoting now, he says, "And now, says the historian Bauer, to whose learned labors we have been indebted for many of the facts mentioned in this chapter, quote, that we have seen the temporal power united in the popes to the spiritual, the crown united to the mitre, and the sword to the keys. I have them for a while with two short he says, I shall leave them for a while with two short observations. First, that is their spiritual power, so also their temporal power was owing to the usurper, the one to Emperor Phocas and the other to King Pepin. Okay? The Pope's spiritual keys, the Pope's spiritual power, came from the wicked, murderous, treasonous, probably one of the most murderous and wicked kings that ever drew a breath in this world, the Emperor Phocas, who made the popes of Rome universal bishop, prince of all the churches, Lord of lords, and now his temporal power, his kingly status, is granted to him by King Pepin, just as wicked, though not as murderous. Second, that as they most bitterly inveighed against the patriarchs of Constantinople as the forerunners of Antichrist for assuming the title of universal bishop, and yet laid hold of the very first opportunity that offered to resume, or rather to assume that very title for themselves. I remind my listeners, when the Emperor of the East first bestowed upon the patriarchs of Constantinople the title universal bishop, the popes of Rome retaliated and threatened that anyone who takes upon himself the title universal bishop, if he is not Antichrist proper, he is at least a forerunner of Antichrist. And yet, history reveals that at the very first opportunity available to the popes of Rome, they took upon themselves that very title, and they got it from Emperor Phocas. Universal bishop, Lord of lords. And with the Pope's own mouths, they declared anyone who takes this title is the Antichrist. Do we need any more convincing? Are we going to be serious about this study? There's nothing more convincing than the testimony of one's own mouth about this event. The papacy is, was, and always will be the Antichrist by his own admission. All right? And equally so did they inveigh against the Lombards as the most wicked of men for usurping the dominions of their most religious sons, the emperors. Okay, the popes condemned the kings of the Lombards for treasonously taking land, people, cities, and properties away from the rightful owners, the emperors. And yet they themselves, the popes, usurped the dominions of their most religious sons just as soon as they had it in their power, unquote. This is from the historian Bauer. And this isn't the only record that Bauer gives us of the diabolical history of the popes. Bauer wrote a book entitled The Lives of the Popes. And it's still available to be read, and I'm reading it now on the same source that I'm referring to this book, archives.org. Bauer's The Lives of the Popes, or The History of the Popes. Google it for yourself and read it. Bauer was once a devout Roman Catholic, and he was elevated after a great deal of training to the status of one of the high members of the High Court of the Inquisition. He became an inquisitor. He was one of those who persecutes the saints of the Most High through the Roman Catholic Inquisition. And he fled the Inquisition because he couldn't tolerate the tortures that they were inflicting upon God's peoples. He wrote a book exposing the whole thing. It's still available to be read. I'm going to read it. Maybe not here on Inquisition Update, but I'll certainly read it for myself. I'll just see what the Lord leads, whether I should read it here on Inquisition Update or not. But he is the keeper of the history of the popes. Once he repented of being an inquisitor in the Pope's inquisitions, then he wrote about the diabolical lives of the popes. He was a Roman Catholic insider. He was a Roman Catholic inquisitor under the Inquisitor General, the most wicked, bloodthirsty, criminal, and diabolical institutions of history. And he came out, and he told the truth. What a valuable history that is. And it's this account that we've read right here that comes from this work, The Lives of the Popes. Read it for yourself. Now we're going to chapter 6. This is beginning of page 174 if you're following along. The title is The Confirmation and Increase of the Pope's Temporal Power to the Coronation of Charlemagne in A.D. 800. We've just covered the period of time when the Pope becomes, for the first time in papal history, a king among kings. Now we're going to go from that period to the period where the Pope demonstrates he is a king of kings. Not just a king among kings, but he literally crowns kings, therefore making himself the King of Kings in 800 A.D. with the crowning of Charlemagne. This is subsection 55. Again, we're on page 174. We are henceforth to contemplate the Pope, not simply as a professed Christian bishop, but as an earthly prince, exercising a temporal sovereignty over a rich and fertile country. In reference to the extent of these first fruits of the conquests of Pepin, now possessed by the popes, says Gibbon, the historian, quote, the ample measure of the exarchate might comprise all the provinces of Italy, which had obeyed the emperor and his vicegerent, but its strict and proper limits were included in the territories of Ravenna, Bologna, and Ferrara. Its inseparable dependency was the Pentapolis, which stretched along the Adriatic from Rimini to Ancona and advanced into the Midland country as far as the ridges of the Apennines. The splendid donation was granted in supreme and absolute dominion and the world beheld for the first time a Christian bishop invested with the prerogatives of a temporal prince, the choice of magistrates, the exercise of justice, the imposition of taxes, and the wealth of the palace of Ravenna. So the Pope is now not just a bishop, but he is a well-endowed king. Subsection 56. These limits were subsequently much enlarged by successive donations from the celebrated son and successor of Pepin. In the year 774, Charlemagne, in compliance with the entreaties of Pope Adrian, advanced at the head of a numerous army into Italy with the professed design of protecting the Holy See from the attacks of Desiderius, at that time the king of the Lombards. Upon the approach of the French king to Rome, he was received by the Pope, as might be expected, with the highest marks of distinction. On the morning after his arrival, Adrian, with the whole body of the clergy, proceeded to the ancient church of St. Peter's early in the morning to await the arrival of Charlemagne and conduct him in person to the tomb of St. Peter. Arrived at the steps of the church, the king kneeled down and kissed each step of the sacred edifice as he ascended. At the entry, he was received by the Pope in all the glorious attire of his pontifical robes, and led him into the church amidst the songs of the clergy and the people, who impiously applied to his stern warrior that song which was originally applied to Christ, who is, quote, Prince of Peace. Blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord. So you see how they've flattered and elevated Charlemagne? Much better to get Charlemagne to drop to his knees to receive his crown from the Pope. See what flattery will get you? It started in the Garden of Eden, and it's still the master weapon of the popes of Rome. Flattery. He still uses it today.